Hey there, everybody. So, I was thinking for this CRT Spotlight video, I actually have a 2-for-1 special for you all. We will be taking a look at two of my televisions that are remarkably similar to each other, and we're going to do a comparison of them. So, on the left, we have a Sony KV-13FS100, and on the right is a Toshiba 14AF44. Both of these televisions originate from the very tail end of the technology's dominance in the electronics industry, with both of them having been manufactured in 2004. So, taking a look at these two televisions together, they appear most like each other when viewed from the front. The Toshiba is a bit simpler of a design, with all of the front panel controls and one of the composite inputs visible along the bottom bezel of the screen. The Trinitron, however, takes a cue from some of Sony's larger sets of the time and hides most of the controls under a fold-away panel, with just the power button remaining exposed. And turning the sets around, we find a few more differences between these two. Both televisions do provide pretty much every input that you would want, with coaxial RF, component video, and additional composite inputs available on the rear. The Toshiba actually has one leg up on Sony's model, though, in that it also is sporting an S-video input as well. However, there is one thing that really irks me about this Toshiba. So, remember those buttons on the front of the television? Notice how there is no button for input selection here? Yeah, unlike how Sony and some other manufacturers were kind enough to provide a means for switching between input channels directly on their televisions, with Toshibas of this era, you are SOL without the remote control. Yeah, that's right, you cannot access any of the inputs at all using the buttons on the TV. Having a remote to pair with it is pretty much a requirement to use anything beyond just the RF tuner that is on this set. But yeah, all in all though, both of these televisions are quite decent examples of CRTs that you would find for sale in the early to mid 2000s. I would consider these two televisions to be a bit on the higher end as well, given that stereo speakers and component inputs seem to have been a somewhat rarity to find on televisions of this particular size. There is, however, one big difference between these two televisions, as I'm sure any CRT aficionados watching this are already very familiar with. While this Toshiba here is using a traditional shadow mask on the face of its picture tube, the Sony, of course, is using their proprietary Trinitron aperture grill for its screen. Now, I'm not going to give a huge in-depth breakdown between what these terms refer to and how they work, since many YouTubers before me have already covered this exact topic in complete detail. However, just in case any of you watching this need a little refresher or somehow managed to miss that particular day of science class, here is the briefest explanation I can possibly craft in order to get all of us on the same page. So a shadow mask and an aperture grill are two different technologies that are both designed to do the same thing, and that is to provide a physical barrier between the electron guns and the viewable phosphors within a cathode ray tube. This phosphor coating is applied to the face of the tube in alternating red, green, and blue formulas, and by means of interfering with the slightly different approach angles resulting from the arrangement of the electron guns located in the neck of the tube, each electron gun is responsible for illuminating only one of the three phosphor colors. This division of work is the fundamental principle behind how a cathode ray tube is able to display a full color image. The main difference between these two designs basically boils down to how the filter is constructed. A shadow mask is made up of a sheet of metal with millions of very small holes photochemically etched into it, while Sony's aperture grill is instead constructed out of razor-thin metal wires. Fun fact, these microscopically small holes are one of the main reasons behind why CRTs are such a pain in the butt to film, since the incredibly teeny pattern created by them often results in a digital camera's image sensor creating the idiosyncratic moire effects. So, what exactly am I getting at here? Well, all this exposition is in order for us to talk about what kind of display makes for a better CRT screen. The debate between shadow mask versus aperture grille literally goes back for decades. In fact, more than half a century, considering Sony rolled out their Trinitron technology starting in the late 1960s. Pop in any CRT forum in the modern era, and no doubt this is a topic that is constantly being discussed between fans of this technology. But considering that I have these two televisions here, which are quite contemporary to one another, I figured these two would make for great subjects for a direct comparison between the two screen technologies. I thought it would be fun to show you some examples of content on these two CRTs and see if you can figure out what image is from what television. I'm going to take extra care to make sure that no part of the actual TV body is visible, so you'll only have the actual image produced by the tube itself to go by. I'm going to show you alternating footage between these two televisions, which will be of the tracked mode run-through of Sonic the Hedgehog's Green Hill Zone. I will not be revealing which television is which until the end of these clips, since I figure it might be fun for you to try to identify what exact tube you're looking at. I will also be cycling through a few different types of AV connections as well, so you can get a sense of how these televisions handle signals over RF, composite, and component video. And with that, here we go. So this is the first TV through RF. And this is the second TV through RF. Now, number 1 through composite. Number 2 through composite. And number 1 through component. And number 2 through component. And just in case you missed some of the finer detail due to the motion blur from the video, here is a still image of television number 1, and here is a still image of television number 2. Alright, so were you able to figure out which television was which? So for those of you who are guessing that the first television was the shadow mask and the second TV was the aperture grille, you are wrong. The first TV was the Sony and the second TV was the Toshiba. Once again, with rapid succession, here's the Sony over RF, Toshiba over RF, Sony over composite, Toshiba over composite, Sony over component, and Toshiba over component. Really, it's quite remarkable how close these two different screen designs have gotten to one another towards the final years of the CRT's dominance. If you really know what to look for, someone with enough experience could still be able to determine which is which. However, when judging image quality as a whole, though, the differences are so absolutely minute that they are pretty much inconsequential. To me personally, when viewing these two with my own eyes, I would say that the Toshiba seems to be a tad bit brighter and crisper than the Sony. However, on the flip side, the Trinitron has ever so slightly better color vibrancy. These attributes could very well be down to the slightly different settings I have selected in each of the television's menu. I'm sure if I felt like being really pedantic, I could get these two looking identical, given enough time tweaking the settings around. These differences fade away even more when you move away from the pixelated content of game consoles, and instead use the screens to view video such as television shows and movies. Depending on the media format and the type of AV connections that you use to hook everything up, video content on each of these screens ends up looking pretty much identical to one another. I'm sure once you start moving up to some of the larger CRTs out there, you can begin to pick the differences apart, but take my word for it, on these 13 to 14-inch screens, I can't see any difference between these two whatsoever. So, what's my point in showing you all of this? Well, this is pretty much to assure someone who might be thinking of getting into this hobby and looking to get their first CRT that, while the community of course will be quick to rave about how nice Trinitrons are, there are also perfectly enjoyable CRTs out there that aren't manufactured by Sony. The main benefit of the aperture grille was much more impactful during the initial years of the technology, with the finer wire mesh in Sony's product allowing for much more energy from the electron guns to reach the phosphor on the screen of the tube. During the heyday of the Trinitron from the late 1960s through the mid 1980s, these were absolutely the CRT to have, with Sony's products being able to produce a much brighter image than what was at all possible on everyone else's shadow mask. Heck, this is the whole reason why Sony won an Emmy in 1973 for their Trinitron technology. However, as manufacturing processes matured heading into the 1990s, the gap between the aperture grille's advantage over the shadow mask narrowed considerably. Competitors were able to fine-tune their production of shadow masks to the point where their performance when compared to Sony screens was pretty much negligible. Because of all this, and given that the majority of CRT enthusiasts today tend to seek out mostly television sets built from the 1990s onward due to their matured technology and host of input options, I feel that the Trinitron might not actually be the end-all be-all when it comes to a great tube. If you're a newcomer to the hobby but seem to be struggling to find a good Sony TV in your area to get started with, I absolutely encourage you to possibly expand your search and consider some of the sets built by the competition. There certainly were other brands out there that are comparable to what Sony was capable of, with Panasonic, Toshiba, JVC, and Sharp being my particular favorites. For instance, my Panasonic Tau here is really nice, and probably has one of my favorite images out of all the 40 plus tubes that I own. I'll definitely be covering this television in depth in a later CRT Spotlight video. But now, for all of you Sony fanboys out there, please, I ask of you, just put down your pitchforks. The whole point of this video wasn't just to dunk on Sony and claim that they are somehow woefully inferior. I mean, just let the fact that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Trinitrons in this one room alone serve as proof that I am a fan of their products as well. My real point is that, given my sample size here, I think that there are quite a few other televisions that certainly belong in the S-tier category, along with Sony's products. This Toshiba 14AF44 is splendid to use, and would certainly make for an excellent CRT for anyone looking to use one in today's era. And of course, while I'm soapboxing about this stuff, I by no means think that my thoughts on this topic are gospel. I know to some in the community there apparently is a perceptible difference between these two, and would never be happy with that Orion Shiba versus a bona fide genuine Trinitron tube. Me personally, I like how this hobby naturally can cater to different preferences, given the wide variety of CRTs out there, and I like to learn about the thoughts of others while I share my own. Apart from my childhood experiences growing up around CRTs in the 1990s, I've been participating in this hobby and building my current collection of tubes for almost 10 years now, so it excites me to be able to share my insights on this hobby with the newer generations of CRT fans that join us every day. But considering everything I've discussed here in this video, given that today, in 2025, even the newest CRTs out there are currently pushing at least 20 years old as of now, the real answer to the question of which CRT is best for me isn't really a particular brand, but really just a working one. Sure, there are a few other factors to consider, namely what you plan on using the television for, and thus what kind of inputs and features you'll need for your purposes. But as a whole, in my opinion, the argument over which brand is better is somewhat of a moot point for the majority of users out there. As long as the television functions with no glaring issues, you'll still have fun with it for quite a few years to come. Heck, I'd still take one of these mystery bargain brand CRTs over any LCD panel for retro content any day. Seriously, even the cheapest no-name budget tube is going to look far better than a flat screen panel like this. And so, that about wraps it up for this CRT Spotlight video. Believe it or not, this video originally was supposed to be much shorter, but as I kept thinking of more interesting stuff to add to the conversation while I was writing the script, the whole thing ended up just snowballing into its final form here. But hopefully you found this as enjoyable to watch as it was for me to make. Once again, I thank you all for joining me on another episode of Steve's Assorted Stuff. And until we meet again, have a great day, everybody.